All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is the 174th Scientific Governance and Risk Meeting. Today is Thursday, January 13th, 2022. My name is Peyton. I go by Pros online, and Pros 11 more specifically, and I'm one of the governance facilitators here at MakerDAO. I'm joined today by a bunch of awesome people who both work for, care about, and are interested in the Maker protocol. And this is kind of our weekly governance and risk meeting where we discuss current topics, things going on in the governance realm, and potential risks or opportunities we see for the protocol in the future. So a couple of housekeeping things, I guess, before we get started. You might have noticed this call is being recorded. So hello, if you're watching us on YouTube. We do post the calls in their entirety afterwards. So keep that in mind for when you're speaking. Try not to speak over one another. So that can be a little annoying to listen to after the fact. Likewise, if you have a question, we do still want you to participate and encourage you to speak up and ask questions when the time permits. If you're either not comfortable or for whatever reason unable to hop on the mic during this, feel free to drop your question or comment in the sidebar and we'll cycle to it when conversationally appropriate. Cool, I think that mostly does it for our little housekeeping matters. We do have a bit of an agenda to get to. If you don't mind kicking us the next slide. Thanks, Artem. It's the first time Artem has to work with my erratic slide skipping. So appreciate you sticking with me today. We'll start as usual with our governance roundup, and then we'll go into some kind of presentations/discussions, really more discussion topics. One about the DAI stablecoin-backing. We have been kind of increasing that in recent days due to market volatility and a few other reasons I'm sure we'll highlight during the call. And the second topic is a little more abstract, but pretty exciting as multidisciplinary approaches towards governance evolution. Kind of fancy academic speak for kind of drawing on different pools of knowledge and kind of where other groups have done and tried in the past and using that to improve our governance system here at MakerDAO. That was a topic that was proposed by one of our recognized delegates, so that's also exciting, and can't wait to kick it over to her to introduce that topic when it comes. Cool. Those topics will usually take up a good chunk of our time here, but should any leftover time remain, we'll have an open discussion period for anything that pops up that isn't related to anything else we're talking about. Probably enough rambling on my end. Thank you, Artem. We'll get to the votes. Cool. So starting with the polls for this week, we had 5 polls that passed, and those are listed there. A couple polls checking community temperature on new D3M implementations, raised to the emergency shutdown module threshold, ESM as we call it. Increase in dust parameter to select LP token vaults. Those would be the uni vaults. And recovering DAI locked in optimism escrow. Those all passed their polling stage. So you'll see a number of them on the next slide for this week's executive, and the rest we'll get to when they're ready. One thing not highlighted on this polls page that I'm realizing is our large amount of ratification polls. We will have them at Better Pablo to walk us through what's being voted on there after I'm done talking. The only other polls you should be aware of is there are 5 Greenlight collateral polls, and those end on the 24th. So make sure you drop your opinion there if you're so inclined to vote. We'll take us to the next slide here and talk about the executive. This will be the first executive of 2022. Pretty exciting. Plan contents are our delegate compensation for December, paying out our recognized delegates for their work based on our latest delegate compensation trial, and the aforementioned LP vault dust changes, as well as recovering DAI from the optimism escrow. As a reminder, you can follow those along in our new spells channel in Discord. Excellent. So that shall take us here to our MIPS update with Pablo.
Yep. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Peyton. Pablo here. I think a bit under the weather, so sorry my voice is not very clear. So we have 11 ratification polls that went up on Monday, and we're going to be taking a quick peek at the votes so far. So we have 3 MIPs as opposed to sub-proposals. MIP 62, the collateral affording process, which defines how users of maker vaults are to be notified when affording collaterals. We also have a MIP 63, Maker Keeper Network, a unified repository to coordinate between multiple third-party keeper networks, and MIP 64, a bug bounty program by Unify. We also have 4 coordinate budgets, the Oracle gas costs, one for DUX, for SES, and for Starneck engineering. We also have 2 new coordinates being proposed: strategic finance with Mark Fisher, also known as ICE, as facilitator, and tech ops with Dimitri and Simon as facilitators. And finally, we have a ratification poll for affording the content production facilitator and reducing its budget to 0. This one's the only ratification poll so far with no as the winning option. And we have a ratification poll for onboarding with Remor as facilitator for real-world finance after the current facilitator, voluntary deferred demission that will become effective on January 25th. We also have a number of proposals in RFC. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'll just mention the latest additions. We have 3 freshly posted budget adjustments for risk, collateral engineering services, and immune biosecurity. Also, Philip is stepping down as the DUX facilitator and passing the torch on to Dennis. And the Civics posted an amendment to MIP 55 that clarifies some points and generally deobfuscates how to propose special purpose funds. Also, I'm going to be taking a week off starting tomorrow. I'll still be reachable if something catches fire, and I will probably be picking at the forum now and then. But consider getting in touch with Civics and Galatu, who are going to be in charge of things during my time off. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pavel. Glad you're getting some time off, and try our best to keep any fires from spreading. Awesome.
Thank you.
Artem, you get to do both the slides and the update today, so take it away.
I guess I'm fully in control. All right, guys. Welcome to the Forum at a Glance, a weekly review of what's happened on the forums, this time for the week of January 7th up to today, January 13th. And we'll begin with our top announcements. First up, it's great to see more of Gala on the forums of GovAlpha announcing the launch of the Maker Operational Manual. The manual aims to become the main source of information and documentation to make governance more accessible and navigatable for the whole community. This will continue to be an ongoing initiative that is open to community feedback and help. And next up, Akarillo and Seun, both members of the blockchain at Berkeley, announced their research project, Stable Sims, where they created a simulation of the DAI stablecoin system and sought to optimize the liquidations 2.0 incentive parameters, CHIP and TIP. And their key results show that it's actually more cost effective to increase the TIP as opposed to the CHIP. They publicly provide both their research paper and simulation code, asking only to show some love and make use of their open source code for further development. Next, we have a special request announcement by the DUX team, who are excited to present the roadmap spotlight for Q1 of 2022. Which provides both a forum post and a recorded walkthrough. So definitely check it out. And moving on to our top discussions, G. Wintery directs community focus back to the case of USDC-backed DAI and potential fear of USDC blacklisting by initiating discussion on ideas and efforts to reduce our dependency on USDC. G. Wintery presents a few ideas, such as reducing USDC in the PSM, auctioning USDC in exchange for Ethereum, and utilizing USDC yield for protocol expenses. And in relation to this, actually, there will be probably some further discussion and hopefully some things that will help. Next up, Alan Peterson publishes a comprehensive post breaking down the maker trust foundations and the trustee role, and introduces a potential attester role in a maker trust. He analyzes the differences between the conventional board of trustees and another kind of trustee called professional corporate trustees. He analyzes their functions and explains the need for an attester role in maker, which he introduces. And he explains it in detail with methods to be appointed and the responsibilities. He also just recently released another related post, which I didn't have time to put up, but definitely recommend to check these out in more details. There's a lot of stuff, and there's actually in this forum at a glance a more comprehensive summary than usual about the post. And moving on to our active signal requests, there's actually no active signal requests currently on the forum. However, 5 signal requests have just recently passed their polls. This is also available on the forum at a glance if you want to check it out with links and everything. And that's it for the forum at a glance. The actual forum at a glance post contains some more information, such as a 3-point summary. Well, this time a 2-point summary, evaluations, reports, assessments, all the ongoing initiatives, and help wanted. That's it on my end. Actually, no, that's not it on my end. We're going to move on to our first discussion of the GNR call. I guess coming in clutch with the post I just mentioned, talking about DAI stablecoin backing, and basically reducing stablecoin dependency. Most discussion is about USDC and the fear of blacklisting of USDC, and as well as DAI being backed by a large amount of USDC. So a couple of prompts that I put up, thanks to David and Peyton and other people that helped. And we'll get started with the first prompt and discussion on ideas on reducing stablecoin dependency for DAI, especially in the case of a potential bear market coming along. We'd love to be bullish, but we can't always be bullish. We have to expect and prepare for the worst. And so, yeah, it's about steering collateral diversification and preparation of a bear market.
Thanks for that intro, Artem.
I mean, I can say that from CES and real world finance, 2022 is really about scaling up the DAI supply generated against real world assets. So I think that's definitely one part of the equation here, hopefully.
I think the main issue is like the scale, right? Like we have a lot of USDC we want to offset. Like I think the main thing we've been pursuing is like the institutional vault side, right, for crypto assets.
And I guess for some framing there, particularly well, thinking about the bear market is important. It's because typically, like unless DAI demand also dries up with a bear market, you have a problem where there's still a ton of demand, and currently the only way at scale of accessing the DAI is stable coins through like our PSMs. So like it's likely, like we've been seeing this last week, where volatility will increase our backing on stable coins. So even though we have been doing really well for a little bit, as soon as the markets got more volatile again, we're back to pushing 50% stablecoin backing.
Yeah, really, bear or bull market, it seems DAI demand is up only. Yeah, it's a good problem to have, I would say, but it's a problem. We need to catch up supply.
And I'll move on to the next prompt. Seems like we'll maybe get more discussion actually. So the next prompt is completely a 180. Interesting discussion on shifting public relations regarding USDC backed DAI. Sort of everyone, thinks of it. The public sentiment is pretty negative, and it's kind of seen like a DAI wrapper. But what about promoting the public sentiment towards seeing it as a security buffer, or just promoting a positive sentiment overall?
I mean, it's like both of those things, right? If we get enough of it, like, so it's a little bit hard to sort of completely flip like the perception, I guess.
I mean, like, do you want us to say something nice about USDC being part of DAI? I mean, I did come across like a kind of funny post where somebody basically reinvented DAI. People were talking about how expensive transactions got with USDC on chain and how they get worse because of the blacklist and all of the like upgradability and like poor memory management. So transferring USDC is actually like reasonably expensive right now. Like I think if you wanted to transfer $100 worth of USDC, you're like nearly paying half of that in transaction fees in gas in order to do it. And so people were like theorizing about making a USDC wrapper that allowed like a more gas efficient transfer. And it turns out like DAI is like one of the most, if not the most like efficient stablecoin implementation on chain. So then maybe there's like a positive PR angle where you could say like, yeah, sure, like DAI is wrapped USDC, and then all the people that want to use USDC like just start using DAI instead because it's cheaper to transfer it between people on chain. I don't know, maybe you can pick up like some positive PR that way.
I know one interesting aspect that came to mind for me was like a lot of the kind of risk-weighted assessments have to do with how much non-stable collateral we have, which makes sense, right? Like unless it's a black swan scenario, you don't have to worry as much about the stable backing as you do like the volatile ones. So in some ways, by having more stable coin backing, like it frees us up a little bit on the risk side with the rest of our portfolio.
So I guess, so if it wasn't, if not USDC, what would be the next best stablecoin backing?
Like Pax GUSD. If you mean like non-centralized backing, then it's like a lot harder to find something that's as good, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, like what Pax and GUSD and USDC are all, let's say, potentially regulated IOU-backed stablecoins. But then there's things like, like USD and, like more decentralized stables, like, we may want to take a look at that at some point too.
Yeah, people bring up like Frax, USD, FA, etc. in the sidebar. Yeah, we've kind of discussed a few of these before, right? Like part of the issue is in some cases market caps just aren't high enough, right? Like we have a lot of USDC we would need to shift if we wanted to switch completely to one of these. Also, there's kind of the question about how stable these will be like over the long term. I think the main worry is.
I mean, fundamentally, these coins, if they're over collateralized, they'll have the same sort of supply issues that we have, or they're backed by centralized stable coins as well. So I don't think there's really, or they'll just plain like explode. So if they're under collateralized, but yeah, I want USD, of course. But like, I don't think there's really sort of a get out of jail free card with any of these.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone kind of wants to talk about the real world asset angle. That's obviously come up a little bit in voice and a decent amount on the sidebar. One interesting challenge I see there is like, since it's not off chain, we have to rely on legal structures and other things that I don't know, add some complication, particularly with the size of our surplus buffer, right? And the idea that like the liquidation for a real world asset is going to be much slower than an on-chain liquidation, assuming both are working as efficiently as possible.
Yeah, I feel like the DAO is kind of having a preference for inaction right now regarding the USDC issue. I think there's different solutions and people don't want to take them because they're not perfect. Like we can look at doing on-chain DeFi stuff, but that has, you know, counterparty risk by investing in other protocols. And we can do off-chain stuff, you know, putting USDC in treasuries or other liquid credit assets, but then that's been criticized from a, you know, decentralization standpoint. You know, USDC is flowing in rapidly to the PSMs now. You know, we have over $4.5 billion of exposure, you know, just sitting there in stables. So, you know, it's tough because it's a lot of money and it's a complex thing to discuss. I think at some point we're going to have to come together as a community and really do some deep analysis on it, or maybe hire people to do some deep analysis on it. Because, you know, structuring even a traditional credit investment for treasury type services, you know, this is, you know, a lot of money. So we have to, you know, do it right. So, you know, real world assets, sure, they're going to help, but right now we're still quite a ways away from that scaling in a significant way.
Yeah, until we get the real world assets online, really, I see it as sort of, we have crypto assets, but you know, we can only get so much supply from those, and those are only really, people want leverage on those in bull markets. So like having centralized stable coins is the only thing we can really do at this stage. I don't see, like we may get a boost from stake ETH. I think that could kind of give us a bit of a shot in the arm, but fundamentally long-term, we need real world assets. Like we just can't keep the supply up to match the demand forever.
I've seen some good conversation with some of our recognized delegates in sidebar. I don't know if any of you had a mic or wanted to hop on. Definitely invite you to do so.
I think this is also like in my opinion, like a capital allocation issue that's kind of derived from being highly decentralized. If we were in like a centralized company, I think you would see a huge investment and focus on scaling real world assets very quickly. I think since this is so new and novel, there's, you know, a hesitancy from the team, I think, to request more funds and scale this. You know, we're kind of at like the stage where we're at a proving grounds, right? You know, maybe someone from, you know, real world assets, I don't know if Will's on, it's too late for him, but, you know, at some point we need to look at, you know, reinvesting like deeply into RWA once we've kind of like proven a base model that's scalable. Like, because given like how important real world assets are to the protocol long term, like we are significantly underinvesting, under allocating capital, in my opinion.
So boosting D3Ms is a risk, and I want to bring that up, but it should be weighed against the risks of having too many stable coins as well, especially because a lot of the demand for DAI is coming from places like Aave and Compound. So I guess you have to decide where you want to take your existential risks.
Wasn't there like a competitive issue with Compound that was brought up on a GNR call before that made it less beneficial of a partner compared to Aave? Are they doing something with stables themselves?
A while back, they talked about launching their own stable coin, like cross-chain thing. I forget what it's called. Cash.
Cash, yeah. Compound Cash.
Yeah.
I don't know what's up with that these days.
they ran into technical challenges, and I'm not with the like parachain thing, and I'm not sure if they have a new direction or not.
But if we look at the question here, shifting PR regarding USDC backed DAI, I mean, yes, I see some people with vested interests and bags saying things on Twitter, but at the same time, we're also seeing all-time high for DAI and DAI being used everywhere. So I think there are different issues here. I mean, I think the biggest issue is the blacklisting risk, and that has been discussed many times, that, you know, it doesn't matter if there's 4 billion DAI or 2 billion DAI in Maker. If it gets blacklisted, it's like game over essentially. So I'm wondering, you know, what is the problem here, because I'm not seeing DAI being used less necessarily. So yeah, I just wanted to emphasize that.
Yeah, as I said, we definitely have a good problem. We have too much demand. That's a really good problem to have. But, you know, we do need to have the supply catch up, or else we're like just going to be wrapped USDC essentially.
Yeah, so I guess my question is then, like, what's the goal in terms of, you know, why not be wrapped USDC? You know, why not 50%? I mean, I'm not saying that that's good. It's just like, what's the goalpost here? Because it's also good to have some stable collateral to cushion us in the market, the downturns.
Yeah, so I think the goal is such that we're not centralized on one particular asset, right? We can survive the collapse of anyone. That should be the goal. So, you know, right now we are critically dependent on USDC, probably even USDP as well. So what we want is a basket of assets, jurisdictionally sort of distinct and diversified. That's the goal in my head.
So I've been a pretty vocal critic of the PSM since it was launched, but I'll take the other side here and say that, like, for the last 6 months or so, we'd actually been reducing the PSM and increasing the supply, and it may just be the case where we have these shocks where we have to take on the USDC to meet the market demand for DAI, and then we can solve that later by slowly bringing back the collateral as the market allows. Like, it might be working. It just we're looking at a local shock right now.
Yeah, I kind of have another view on that. From what I've seen over the past couple of years, DAI demand just steadily ticks up. In the bull market side, it seems to tick up from farming yields, but that's not the entire thing, or else if in the reverse case, the demand would drop, which we're not seeing. There's a bit of a drop when we have a sort of a big market drop, but demand seems to kind of start ticking up again after a while. So it seems we get demand from both the farming and sort of people as a flight of safety out of volatile crypto assets as well. So I don't see why this trend wouldn't continue. So I think we have to kind of, in the bull market case, we kind of have the supply growing as well to kind of roughly match it or even exceed the demand growth due to just the fact that people can mint more and stuff like that. But like this sort of trend of demand just ticking up over time seems to just, as I said, DAI just is up only in demand for the past little bit. So we need to prepare for bear markets where we're just going to take on stable coins because we don't have any alternative.
Oh, I know this is
I just have one question, because this is interesting for growth to like understand what new collaterals we should be looking for. So you think we should be looking for new stable coins on the PSM, or maybe like be more risky and go after DAOs that can take loans in the protocol, or going and trying to find more real world assets deals? Like what's your take on this? What do you think we should like be looking for? Because as I'm understanding, if we all think that we are going to enter in a bear market, then stable coins are inevitable, and we just want like ETH, Bitcoin, and stable coins, and well, of course, real world assets. But we all know that we won't have enough DAI coming from real world assets in maybe in the next, I don't know, 1-2 years or so. So what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, so for the short term, I think trying to capture as much of the big crypto assets, WBTC and ETH, is probably the best strategy. I don't see any, it doesn't have to be a stable coin for the bear market, but basically something that's not correlated to the crypto markets is ideal. But that doesn't really exist other than stable coins. At least at scale, we need big numbers.
So that means institutional vaults.
Yes.
Okay.
No, this topic has come up before and will probably keep coming up again, but thought it was good to kind of take the temperature here and see what new ideas we had. Looking at the time though, I do think it'd probably be good to move us along, and also know we'll get some good delegate input in this one. If there is time at the end, we can always circle back if you had something else to add. But yeah, I actually wanted to kick off the introduction to this topic to the recognized delegate who suggested it from Acre Invest. Kianga, I don't know if you're, thought I saw you on the call earlier. Yeah.
I'm here.
Yeah,
Hi,
take
everyone. Thank you for the invitation to the recognized delegates to submit a topic for this call. I was intrigued by a post recently about multidisciplinary approaches toward governance, and would just love to have a conversation or hear from people on this call as to how our system of governance and recognized delegate function ought to move forward in decentralized way. And, you know, the topic broadly speaking in the community around DAOs and voter participation, engagement, free rider problems, contributions for work. Just wanted to, you know, just see what the thinking is and what people's views are as it relates to MakerDAO and our future.
So yeah, I actually have a couple of prompts that you touched on. So I have this one, and then also if we want to go to directly speaking about the post by Andrew Hall regarding incentives and MKR participations, we could jump to that and then come back to this.
Maybe one specific prompt, since I'm new to the community, I'd be curious what conversations have taken place on this topic up until now. Maybe even any background on the transition from the foundation to setting up recognized delegates, and you know, any history that you think would be important context for me or for others who are new to the community as we think about this broad topic.
Sure. I mean, I can, do you want a quick technical history of how things have changed, and then that's sort of because we weren't always like a protocol that had these delegates, right? This is like a reasonably new development. So everything started out as MKR voting is intended to quantify some measure of like skin in the game. So in a way it's a plutocracy, but it's intended to be that way because We want MKR holders to make sure they make good decisions, and they would be, therefore financially penalized if they made bad ones, right? So good decisions, you get a bigger burn. Bad decisions, you get diluted, right? So that's the sort of basic gist of it. And then from the very old days, there were usually, it was always like this, I guess you call it continuous voting, right? Like, so we always sort of stake our MKR on a particular state of the system. And in the old days, like, you could only change a couple parameters, like in single collateral DAI. And then when we released multi-collateral DAI, the system became like infinitely more configurable, in a way completely upgradable by governance, with a couple caveats that, but for the most part, that's the case. And so same thing, continuous voting, your MKR had to like sort of park itself on an executive to sort of guard the security of the system. So there's already this sort of anti-incentive to take your MKR and move elsewhere, lest you ruin the security of the governance system and you get diluted. And then after a while, it's just too complicated to be voting on like executives all the time. And we started to have a lot more configuration changes. And so we went to like kind of polling as a way to signal what we would want to include into a governance executive. And so now you can kind of poll. That's not really, you send a transaction on chain, but it's sort of off chain that the transactions are quantified into like the polling results. When we do on-chain polling, this isn't to be confused with signal polling in the forums. So when we do on-chain polling, it's mostly just events that are fired and then counting the results of those events. And that allowed us to come up with like a better sort of set of changes and for people to park their MKR in an executive. And then we took a detour into a design space where we would, possibly use like Starkware or some other L2 in order to like reduce the amount of gas that participating in governance was costing. And that sort of led to a lot of ideas around a governance redesign. There's even a MIP for it, like snapshot voting and a bunch of other stuff. But then the gas problem became kind of so great that we effectively maybe there's one step in between the gas problem. We were vulnerable to flash loans for a little bit. So we did do a governance upgrade that prevented the ability for people to take flash loans and vote executives through. And then after that, to reduce the sort of gas costs on individuals from having to participate, we created effectively just like a way for people to aggregate their MKR into a single delegate. And that delegate has the sort of ability to vote the MKR, but not take possession of it. And so now we're in this sort of delegate system, which I think is working to help secure the hat, but yeah, like maybe has like all the trappings of like sort of representative democracy and or maybe all the benefits of representative democracy as well. So that's the sort of history of how we've gotten here. I don't know if there's any questions about that, but.
Thank you, that was great overview. And MakerMan, your comments about other stakeholders, vault holders, DAI holders, and their ability to influence governance. How do people view that dynamic today, and what's a more ideal structure to incorporate their views if the current state is not ideal?
I have some thoughts there. I was talking to Colby Anderson previously. He's now with the SES team, and we had a really good conversation. And he was really able to change my mind on some topics. So I'm with the Dux team. We're building. So we've built a governance portal, for example. So the voting tooling that we're currently using. And yeah, it's pretty obvious that scalability and like the gas costs associated with participating in Maker governance is like a huge user problem right now, and we've been breaking our heads over that problem. And the main challenge I saw initially is that the Maker voting system is really as Christopher just mentioned, right? It's designed for security, and a lot of it is on chain, and it's therefore very difficult to tamper with it, especially as a relatively new core unit. What I actually learned from that discussion with Colby, and also afterwards, after talking with other people, is that we should consider the voting system that we use also as modular, right? So I really believe that this continuous voting mechanism to protect the on-chain maker system, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I don't think we should mess with that in the short term. But I also agree that we have a lot of tooling out there like Snapshot, but also there are alternatives out there. We're already looking into gasless voting mechanisms. There's a lot out there that we can use for multiple things in the DAO. We should probably not use gasless voting for changing on-chain parameters, because that's probably very risky. But we are very eager to explore together with GovAlpha to see which governance primitives or which actions can we potentially use these gasless voting mechanisms for. So just know that from our side, that's super. It's on the radar, and it's one of our priorities for this quarter, and we're looking into it. Not only Snapshot, but also other mechanisms.
Would the community ever have an appetite for polling DAI holders about their views on things? And could that be like a gateway drug toward getting more involved in the Maker core protocol? I mean, my first I was most active before being a recognized delegate, with the vaults and DAI, and that's a relationship that I think more people understand, that that stablecoin, and there may be layers of communication in which we could engage the holders of DAI and then kind of draw them in.
Yeah, so maybe let's speak to this a little bit. So this comes up semi-frequently, right? Like, can we sort of extend some governance power to DAI holders or vault holders? And like in theory, we could do stuff like that, right? So Snapshot could work for DAI, right? We could have a Snapshot system set up versus DAI, so each DAI is a vote and you can vote on things. We could probably do something similar for vault holders if we wanted. The kind of question is sort of, how, to what extent do like maker holders allow like DAI holders and vault holders to affect the system, right? Because the kind of, as Chris mentioned before, right, the key, like, I guess, safeguard, right, in theory, to make holders' decisions is that they're on the hook financially for bad decisions. Whereas, that's true in a limited extent of DAI holders and vault holders, because, if DAI breaks completely, then DAI holders are kind of potentially out of luck. Vault holders, if, basically can get equally screwed over if things go really badly. But there's kind of very little, like, I guess, gradation there, I guess. Like, DAI holders kind of are only screwed if like everything is broken, and like vault holders are only screwed if like everything's broken. Whereas for maker holders, it's kind of more graduated. So it's like, if we do a bad job, then we get like screwed a little bit, or if we do a little bit of a good job, we get like sunburn, which is good. So, and the kind of, the problem is this is like the DAI holders and vault holders have almost like opposing, I guess, like desires, right, or like stakes. And the DAI holders kind of want the DSR to be high, and vault holders want the vault fees to be low. And if you sort of let DAI holders set the DSR to a high number, and you let the vault holders set the vault fees to a low number, then like maker holders end up paying the difference, right? So like in extreme cases, like, I mean, obviously not saying this would happen, right? But if you assume everyone's perfectly selfish, right, then that's kind of the system you end up with. Which is kind of why, like, traditionally it's been like maker holders that have the voting power, because they're the ones that have to like balance the two, I guess, if that makes sense.
It strikes me that there's a whole realm of conversation and engagement that's kind of bigger than the technical functioning of the protocol and some of the operational details as to how it should run, and which maybe we could engage a wider audience with in terms of some of the, as a humanities person. It's also why this post, really jumped out at me, and I thought it'd be a good add to the conversation, which is very operational on the protocol as a system. But the potential and the importance of our work as a totally decentralized stablecoin, and obviously the conversation around clean money. I'm just thinking about ways that it could be even just a kind of marketing, but also important in terms of gauging views that ultimately impact the adoption and scalability, just in terms of the awareness and the attraction for people of what MakerDAO stands for. But I totally agree and hear what you're saying. It's like not give those stakeholders really a foothold in some of the important decisions around the actual operation and kind of structure of the protocol from a business standpoint.
Actually, I think you bring a good point that would be relevant to the last conversation, which is we may be able to pull DAI holders, have them signal in some way, not just some Twitter poll or forum poll somewhere, but people that actually have skin in the game as DAI holders. We could ask them questions like how much stablecoin backing are they willing to tolerate, right? Like we may actually be able to get really good signals from them. And we're in the stablecoin backing scenario because DAI holders and integrators effectively told us they weren't willing to tolerate a soft peg, right? If they were willing to tolerate a soft peg, then we wouldn't need PSMs. We would just be floating 4 cents above or 4 cents below peg at any given time. But DAI holders and integrators were specifically not using DAI because of the floating peg. And so, you may be able to quantify almost where the sentiment is, at what threshold do they find it completely intolerable, or they would rather have a floating peg than a tight integration and that sort of thing, right? But without actually affecting any protocol.
I think that of course, it will be interesting to ask the DAI holders what they think, but we in Growth, we have all of our interactions are with DAI holders, and they really don't care about what's behind DAI. They just care about DAI being a hard peg to one, hard, and to find different on-off ramps with low spread and low fees in the middle. And of course, they care about having gasless transactions if it's possible, and pretty much that's it. So they care about liquidity, about the fees that are in the middle of each transaction, and they need the DAI to be a stable coin and keep the peg. That's what they care about. But I mean, it's what everyone looks in a stable coin, not just in DAI.
Lots of good conversation going on in the chat here. Would encourage anyone, if you're comfortable hopping on the mic, to go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that I had written that in theory, MKR holders are incentivized to, keep both DAI holders and vault holders happy. But as Chris writes in the sidebar, that there might be, MKR holders might have imperfect information about, the sentiment of these actors, which I completely agree with. And to Nadia's point, I was working with her in the foundation on integrations, and one thing that we did in the integrations team was basically, integrators are not following Maker governance because there's simply too much to follow, as I'm sure people on this call also think sometimes. So what they care about, as I also see, is a stable product that is useful. So we would try to just make sure that there weren't any breaking changes happening, for example, integrators or major upgrades that would have impacts, major impact on the die holders, where they would have to migrate that die or something like that. So that's just my 2 cents.
Thanks, Nikolai. Good reflections there. And, the other thing I'll call it shoot pizza. A number of people do go from vault holder or die user to eventually MKR holder, and that is a good path, but also several people who don't. So I appreciate conversations like this for
rather complex. So it's hard to keep track and learn all this stuff. It takes a long time. It's not going to, well, if you are complaining about NPR holders not having enough information to make good decisions, how are we going to get better if we get more people in who have even fewer information and probably not even the attention span or the willingness to learn all that stuff? I don't think we have a problem on the side of non-NKR holders participating. If you're a die holder and you disagree with stuff that's going on, just join the forum and complain and interact, because that's the only way you can learn about this stuff anyway. Because usually it's not about, as a vault holder, I want low stability fees. Yeah, of course you want that, but it's just one part of the equation. It's just one parameter. It's super complex. I think the system that we have right now of signal requests, which is basically the House of Commons, so regardless if you hold MKR or not and how much you hold or not, you have just one vote, is actually pretty good. I think it's a great system that we have in there. In some cases, it's maybe super slow, and sometimes maybe you don't think that the results that are reasonable are actually going on chain. I actually suffered from that during the surplus buffer discussions we had in the last 12 months. But actually, I think it's still a valid system. Of course, it's a system of compromises, but I think that's healthy to do it this way. That's decentralized, I would say. I don't think that we have a big issue on that topic.
I would honestly take the stance that we do have an issue, in the sense that the voter participation rate is ridiculously low, and I think that's one of the results of the current design of also our voting tooling, but also our governance system. And that's also one of the things I learned from Andrew's from the conversations I had with Andrew, is that one of the reasons why in real life, right, in governance of some kind of nation state, the reason that there's elections every now and then, instead of asking the people to vote on every single let's say topic or issue as they come along, that's simply not feasible. So I think there are a lot of ways to redesign or improve both the voting tools, but also the governance process, to make sure that we do not ask for too much attention from our users, but also from our delegates. I think there's a lot to gain by exploring that, and I'm also happy that we're having this discussion, because we should not regard our current system design as the way to go, simply because it's technically decentralized.
Can I chime in a bit here a little bit? Because I think we're kind of forking on two things here. One is like, is there really a governance problem, right? I've advocated for a long time that we should hear from all stakeholders, not necessarily that all stakeholders should have levers on Maker to adjust the system, right? You're running a business, you kind of like to hear from the people that are using it, so you can have your pulse on the people, right? The idea of governance and the issues of governance, I've been around the block on this for decades now with lots of different organizations. The real issue that I see at Maker, I've seen this in other places, we see it in stocks, is kind of the centralized ownership, right? I mean, if we really analyzed our Maker holder wallets and what happened in governance in the past and currently, I'm thinking there's 50 wallets at most that have delegated, right? And probably 5 of those hold 90% of the major Maker that's been delegated, if that. And so if we really want to talk about governance, we need a governance analysis to understand what's going on in governance. And then we need to think hard about what we think a problem is and what we think the solution is in terms of what we want. And a lot of us are going to disagree and discuss, right? And so, I want to hear from other stakeholders. I would like polling to not cost an arm and a leg. Like, I would really like to see that move somewhere else, because it doesn't do anything on chain except give us a signal. And so, I see this as two different things. I want to hear from stakeholders. I would like to have mechanisms in place for that. And then I would like to really look at an analysis of maker ownership with respect to governance. And then we can start to address these issues and think about if there are problems or not.
I'm just going to give a little technical feedback. So today, the polling contract, when we do on-chain polling, it knows nothing about MKR. You just send a transaction that fires an event, so it's as cheap as possible. And then it's sort of off-chain stuff that checks how much MKR was held. We could easily deploy that contract onto an L2. People could send a transaction on that L2. It'd be wildly inexpensive, and we could quantify as many tokens as they were holding. So we could ask like a DAI holder or LP token that had DAI in it, or the 3 pool or token, like whoever would be quantified as a DAI holder. We could ask them like questions about DAI and get feedback.
Okay, I'm going to chime in here. That's a great technical solution, but it's not going to solve the problem, because even if the polling on chain is for free, I don't expect a lot of change there, because MKR holders just have no incentive in taking part in governance. The value of your MKR is not changing if you are taking part in governance or not, and that's the flaw that we need to fix if we really want to drive up the participation rate of MKR holders. I think most of the MKR holders just have this as an investment. They actually don't want to care, and that's okay. But there should be a strong incentive that they basically put their MKR at work by delegating to someone else, and this will also drive in a lot of more of active delegators or delegates into the system. But if there is zero incentive for doing so, it's not going to change if we do snapshot voting or if we do polling on an L2. That's my bet at this thing.
Yeah, let me address that, because for some time, it's one of the reasons why I brought up this idea of having some sort of reward for participation, right? And if the rewards in Maker that was kind of printed, okay, I know everybody hates that, then in this loose sense, the people who don't participate get diluted away by the ones who do. And I worked really hard trying to come up with a model, and the model was this idea of just paying a reward, like putting a bounty on part poll and particularly executive participation. And that way it rewards the people who participate. It rewards them in direct proportion to their participation. So you don't have any of these issues about arbitrary levels of whatever. And you can use that reward, I had it at like the 0.2% level of Maker inflation. And we could have a 50% pass through on delegates and basically compensate delegates. And then basically the 50% pass through can go to the rest of the people. The issue is gas paying them out. But you could do this over time. You can have it vest. I agree with you. The whole idea is that there's no disincentive for people, or there's no disincentive for people not to participate. And I've seen this in so many communities where there were equal shares to all the people, and there would be small groups of people that just wouldn't do anything to participate in the community. And all these other people were doing a huge amount of work, and all these other people who weren't doing anything were getting the benefit. And that ends up not working very well in the long term. So I agree with you, Shoki, that some approach to do that would work. Unfortunately, Maker governance really hasn't wanted to step in the direction of some sort of reward for that would dilute the rest that don't do anything for participation.
That actually perfectly brings up the next prompt between you and Shupi on, we can't meet everyone's needs, and we have to decide on a best approach going forward. We want to improve incentives or improve user experience or something like gasless voting, but also we want to control the power that some voters have. Let's just say gasless voting would be bad for risk parameters. And we also want realistic steps going forward, something like short or medium term plans within the next 6 to 12 months. So I guess the question is, how do we decide the best approach, and what could be the best approach without, sort of kind of meeting people's needs, but also not pissing everyone off.
Can we start with just getting polling on off L1 ultimately, and try and figure out how to get some of our additional stakeholders in? Because maybe if we get some other stakeholders playing, they might buy Maker and play more. We'll get a little bit more participation. I see that as kind of a low-hanging fruit that, at least if I hear Chris right, is kind of an easy one to tap.
Yeah, it's more UI work than anything, or whatever the off-chain quantifying. I don't know who's responsible for that right now.
Yeah, I guess from the governance perspective, you do have to be a little careful when you change these things, because you can end up with unintended consequences, right? Like, for instance, if you go to a snapshot that kind of changes a lot of the assumptions you're making, and that, it's taking a snapshot of voting weight and time. So both for people who may have sold their MKR past that time can still have their full voting weight. And like, let's say your proposal's losing and you wanted to acquire more MKR, like you could currently in the system, you would be unable to do so. So there are always going to be like advantages and disadvantages to making a change like that. And it's just important that when you have a method in mind, you consider like, all right, what am I losing by making this change?
Let's see if I've fixed my microphone issues. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. One consideration for Chris Mooney's suggestion from a technical perspective is that would decrease gas costs, but would require anyone participating in those polls to have whatever L2 gas transaction token is required. So they would have to be able to get that before they could participate in those polls, right, Chris?
Yeah, or alternatively, we could count the snapshot date on all chains at once. So we could deploy it to Optimism, Arbitrum, and let's say on mainnet, and then just count up anyone that sent a transaction. But yeah, if you're not already on an L2, you got to move F over to that L2 to make the transaction. So.
Hey, would it be possible to get data on other protocols results for using Snapshot? Because I can tell you from someone that enjoys lurking around other protocols, Balancer, Fate Protocol, whoever else, they don't get a big turnout with Snapshot. Maybe 20, 30 different addresses. The only time I ever see like a lot of excitement and a huge voter turnout is when you have a new protocol that's got a lot of people excited. Maybe they got an airdrop. And all of a sudden there you see an onslaught of voters come out and participate on Snapshot, right? Because obviously it's free. But yeah, I'm just wondering if someone has some kind of the ability to pull some data and see what these OG protocols, what type of turnout they're getting with Snapshot, because I'm willing to bet that it's not big. And if Maker goes into a Snapshot model, you're going to get maybe a few more turnout, but I don't think it's going to improve 100%.
Mark dropped the link to snapshot.org. It's pretty easy to browse through there, but would be nice to get some comprehensive data. We've looked into some stuff in an upcoming research report at GovAlpha, but it wasn't specifically related to delegating. So I don't believe those metrics are going to be included. I will see what I can do on that front.
Yeah, I mean, I think investigating some sort of cheap, like either gasless or L2 voting makes sense, right? It's kind of just more or less an obvious progression from what we have, I think. But yeah, as other people said, I don't expect it to drastically change the amount of participation we're getting. I think it's still worth doing, right? Because it makes it cheaper for those people who are participating, which is a benefit of itself. But yeah, I don't think it's going to fundamentally change the game.
Cognizant of the time here, we do have potentially a little bit for open discussion if there are no last remarks on this topic.
Yeah, I'll just say it's the governance contract redesign was MIP 26. It was a technical MIP that included some features. There's a forum post about it, and people can add comments there if they have more ideas. Although that current development path, I think, is on the back burner, at least from particle engineering's perspective. So, but still, if you have ideas, it's a good idea to quantify them, because at some point, this is going to come to the forefront. We're going to want to redesign everything.
I should mention that the current delegation contracts have a 1-year expiration on them as well. So I don't remember when we started that, but those will all come to an end at some point, and delegates will have to reinitialize a delegation contract. It might be worthwhile to consider changes around that time. Otherwise, we're going to roll into another year of the same system.
Makes sense. And for anyone wondering, the reason behind the expiration, if something were to happen to a delegate, right, especially one that just is using a personal address or what have you to make their votes from, obviously that MKR would be stuck, and anyone who didn't realize it or isn't paying attention would just have their MKR delegated to someone who's not doing anything. So a few different reasons, but yeah.
Yeah, the other one that was more powerful for me was in the opposite direction. So let's say a micro whale, right? You've got a couple hundred MKR, 1,000 MKR or so, and you delegate that, and then I don't know, you get hit by a bus, right? And without the expiration, then the person you delegated to effectively has control of your voting power off into eternity. But this is something I've seen blown up, actually happen in the real world with HOAs and stuff, where people kind of age out and they delegate their voting to a particular actor, and that person ends up basically having a super majority. It becomes a little dictatorship. So you really do need to age out delegation.
There's also a perverse incentive there for a delegate to ensure that their delegatee cannot undelegate from them. So you can imagine all of the ways that could happen. And they're sort of dark when you go down that path.
Plan for all sorts of scenarios on the blockchain, right? Awesome. Any topics for open discussion? Also a good time if you wanted to circle back to something that was said earlier that we moved on from.
Just a quick comment on Snapshot and comping to Aave. Looking at our forum activity, it looks like we have around 6x the amount of forum posts a month compared to them for topics. And their voting participation on Snapshot is significantly higher than ours if you look at any of the closed poll on their website. So I think that, maybe, and I doubt that's unique to Aave. I mean, we can go through a bunch of other protocols, but I would assume that higher forum participation should translate into higher voting through Snapshot generally.
Yeah, I mean, there are external factors as well too. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say the same thing to you, right? Like there's, there's staked Aave, right? And other things, right? People in Aave get paid for, or get rewarded for being staked in governance. I think that's the compounding factor there, right?
Yeah,
But they don't actually have to vote, right? They just stake. And the effects of staking are effectively just the same thing as holding an MKR token, right? We just don't require people to stake it.
People staked in Aave, aren't they first in line to be like recapitalizing the protocol as well, though? Like there's a trade-off, isn't there?
Yeah, but it's not quite the same as Maker, right? Because like they get more than the proportion. They've like, it's not split over all token holders, it's split over all staking token holders. I think it is right that they still get it even if they don't vote though, so maybe that's not a valid point that I made earlier.
I was also going to suggest that like our system potentially kind of discourages active voters just because we have so many votes, polls every week, executives every week, potential for emergency things, and like a lot of different types of polls. So that complexity and like continued need to have a new thing like appear can be intimidating for some voters, and have them reach the conclusion that like, oh well, I can keep up with this protocol because they only vote a few times a month. Whereas something like Maker, we had 21 polls go up on Monday, for instance. Like there was an abnormal week for sure, but it does happen.
I still think we're kind of overcomplicating it. I just clicked through like 10 different DAOs and they all have tremendous voter participation on Snapshot. I don't really see any that have less than us, to be honest. And these are even smaller projects than us. So I don't know, I'm sure there's some data that can be pulled somewhere. Maybe Snapshot themselves have a report they could share with us to do some analysis on. But from what I see, participation is significantly higher than ours from an individual's wallet standpoint.
Yeah, I agree. We are complicating right now. And as I said before, I still think it's a good idea to pursue. But I will make the point that like there's like no civil protection at all for like Snapshot votes. It's like completely free to vote. Like I'm sure in some cases like all those votes are legitimate, but I'm also sure there's some cases where they're not. I don't know.
Lot of interesting discussions. I'm also happy to close the meeting early for once. We tend to go on quite a ways, but consider this your last call. If you've got anything.
So Peyton, one quick thing that may be helpful, Long for Wisdom suggested to me in Discord that we on protocol engineering write up a description of this, but it might be helpful to talk through it. In this week's executive, we're going to have the optimism recovery of the 10 million DAI that got burned. And since that's a fairly unique, up to this point at least, governance action, and we have several of the people that will be voting on that on here and we're recording, so hopefully others are watching. I wanted to open the floor. If anyone wanted to talk about that, I'm happy to go over kind of at a high level what the plan is, and then we can ask questions just so everyone's comfortable with what's going to show up in the executive.
Awesome.
Okay, great. So this week we are dealing with the 10 million DAI that was burned by the user lost some DAI. There was a forum post about it and the poll passed. Basically what happened is this user called the burn function on the Optimism DAI contract, and that destroyed 10 million DAI on Optimism. In the executive this week, we are going to be approving the transfer of that DAI from the mainnet layer 1 escrow contract to the user on mainnet. We're able, so thank you, Kurt. That's a really important thing, that this user destroyed the DAI on Optimism, which means that our Optimism DAI total supply is less than, significantly less than 10 million DAI, less than the mainnet balance of the escrow contract. This opens us up to just transfer the 10 million DAI on mainnet to the user's address on mainnet while keeping our balance rules and variance in place, which is that the mainnet escrow balance should be greater than or equal to the total DAI supply on optimism. So it's fairly simple governance action. We're making a ERC20 approval on mainnet DAI, and then we're executing a transfer from the POS proxy to move 10 million DAI from the escrow to the user's account on mainnet. We're not touching anything on optimism. We're not passing any governance actions from L1 to L2. I'll stop there because I feel like I'm probably going to start rambling into technical details and see if there's any questions or discussions people have, points of clarification.
That makes it a lot clearer for me, Chris. At least, thank you.
And I have a draft that will put this, I'll put it probably in the forum post for the signal request, and we'll link it in the governance Discord channel as well to kind of write this up too, so anyone can read through that.
See, Makerman commenting and kind of questioning about the need for like a test or some sort of verification for the user. If you're following the form, we did have the wallet address sign a specific message saying like, hey, yes, this is me and I'm the one who lost the DAI. Might be interesting, just a brief technical, like, why is that enough for us? I mean, that's not a simple technical explanation, but to me, I'm like, the address is matched. Cool, we're good to go.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just me. Before I send 1 million, I usually send 100, but it's just me.
Yeah, but so this might be too technical, but I was wondering, like, why can you call the burn function? Like, why isn't it authed? It seems like we would, yeah, people could take DAI out of circulation. That would have some repercussions. Yeah, I was just interested from an engineering point of view.
Yeah, the burn is off on the MKR token. So, you know, maybe there's a good argument that it should have been off on the DAI token, but I mean, we heavily rely on burning in the DAI join adapter. In theory, you could just give the DAI join adapter a privilege to burn. But I think there's also approval burning, right? And we have the, like, you can approve a certain amount and then someone else can burn if you've approved them to. Is that true?
Yeah, I think at least the mainnet tokens work that way. DAI and MKR both. So the approve is for both burn and transfer. Because if you approve someone to transfer away your tokens, they could just transfer the tokens to themselves and then burn them.
I'm just interested how this could happen. They really have to go out of their way to burn their tokens.
Yeah, I actually, none of us asked, as far as I know. You know, I like imagining how they did it more than the reality, maybe, but but yeah, the reality is probably something like they were testing some amount of code and like didn't realize they were connected up to their RPC endpoint and like executed the burn or something, but that'd be my guess. But yeah. Hey, I do want to discuss like a bit
Chris,
about...
sorry, real quick before we move on, I want to make sure that I'm addressing the comments in the chat here about documenting the process. Are you all asking about having a formal process for this that we can apply now and in the future, or are you asking about a write-up for what the specific action is going to be?
I'll speak a bit for delegates here. There's a number of us that we would just like to see a global process for a criterion of when we're going to do it, whether there's a fee or not, and the process involved for how to do it. And so we don't want to have to deal with this in a one-off event model. It just doesn't feel right. We would like to have this as kind of a general thing. And that would make us feel better about it. And it should be easier then to deal with, at least in my opinion. Anybody else can speak up.
No, I agree with that. And I think we want to, you know, kind of manage the inflow or signal that there is a process and what it is, and that everyone has equal understanding of being treated the same, and also that we manage the workload, and to the extent that a fee is appropriate for the extra resources and time. And also as a, kind of to encourage or incentivize people to be really super careful and not have a sense that if I mess this up, I can just, go to the community and they'll fix it and undo it for us. So the moral hazard issue is also, I think, important to think about here.
Yeah, that's actually this literally the comment I was going to make is the hazard that we create, especially at different thresholds. So it just makes sense for us to probably have a policy. In my mind, I was thinking, for these really large amounts, we are moderately incentivized to try and take any deflationary pressure off the peg, right? So like burning 10 million these days isn't that big of a deal, but you could imagine when it was 10% of supply, like that would have caused like really bad repercussions for DAI's peg. So there's that. We have narrowly escaped enormous sums being locked into like DeFi Ponzi games during DeFi summer a few times. So we've almost had to do this in the past. But then I think there's a whole class of like normal users that have made this mistake, where they've like, sent the DAI to the DAI contract or whatever. And in my mind, I was thinking like we may be able to have like a once a year sort of debt forgiveness jubilee, where we create a Merkle distributor and we basically like create a token type called, I don't know, dead, right? And then you can mint DAI against dead. And the Merkle distributor basically like does all this under the hood and mints you a bunch of new DAI. And then the end contract basically cleans the accounting up at emergency shutdown so that we don't account for dead as a real collateral type. So I think that we can handle smaller cases on like one giant aggregate once a year. And then like larger cases, I think we need to figure out where the threshold or where the cutoff is. Clearly 10 million is the cutoff right now. So
I want to say that this also is a special case because it's L2 and because we're able to do this without with kind of this sleight of hand that doesn't mess with the accounting. The burn function on L1 DAI is also unauthed, so this could theoretically happen on layer 1, and we wouldn't have the same ability to just pull this out of a distributor contract or the escrow contract. So there's the question of what we would do if this had happened on L1 where 10 million DAI was just burned. The mint function is authed, and the only contract that has the ability to mint new DAI is the join adapter for DAI. So we do have to create creative solutions like Chris was talking about there if we want to perform a similar action on L1.
yeah, really what this user did is they just manually called one of the steps that you would end up going through if you were going to withdraw your DAI from L2 back onto L1. So we're, in a way, we're just completing the rest of the steps. Oh, did I cut out?
Oh, no, sorry, I just started talking over you. My fault.
Oh, go ahead, Kurt.
I wasn't adding anything material, just saying they did the first half of a withdrawal, basically. I'm just doing the second half.
Nick brought up a question in the sidebar asking if anyone was concerned from the legal perspective once we display the ability to perform the action, that it would become an obligation to do so in the future. Seems worth calling out, I guess.
I mean, under what jurisdiction would be my question?
Well, even just
Like,
a customer service perspective, right? Like not even a legal thing.
Which
like
is why the policy is important. Yeah, I would say maker holders should probably like signal on chain what they're willing to accept as a policy for this. And then, yeah, from like a legal perspective or whatever, then I think it just comes down to whether or not a particular jurisdiction can coerce MKR holders into performing an action.
I mean, we can pat ourselves on the back, but the guy that came in here a couple months ago and lost a few ETH on L2, it was a much smaller amount than this, but it meant a lot to them. So, like as things stand right now, we're really just taking this stuff on a case-by-case basis, and that's probably not the right way to go.
And I think also from a policy perspective, it's important to have it clear that both the case that Brian just mentioned with the ETH and the case with this DAI are kind of very specific circumstances. Just because you lose ETH or lose DAI does not mean that we're going to be able to recover it in all cases. And not having a clear kind of explanation of that, I think, will put us at some level of, at best, customer service risk.
It does open up for some creative accounting if someone is speculating in losing that DAI for tax reasons and then having them minted at a later stage by the protocol.
Now everyone has that idea.
The public relations of like the little guy, sort of like, sorry, can't help you. And then the big whales like, oh, we can help you. Even if there's a technical difference, I think that's important to keep in mind, hence the policy. And I'm not sure what the next steps are. If there's already I think there's already some discussion about that policy and how we can move that forward, since we are going to be going ahead and taking care of the burn problem for the 10 million holder. I think we've got to work expeditiously on this.
One
Okay,
for
I see your
Wisdom brought
comment,
up
Chris.
an interesting question. Is anyone actually working on a policy? I think we need one, right? So that we can, it's going to be one that has this fitting in, and then we have to exclude some. You know what I mean? We have to really come up with a policy here, I think. Because
Yeah.
of just PR reasons and just optics, right? And so, as well as just technically.
Yeah, I fully agree. If anybody wants to own that, please step forward. PE will be happy to give you our opinions.
Well, I remember looking at, someone shared a Google Doc with me. I can't remember who it is now, which was like an initial draft on a policy. And yeah, I have to figure out, someone's working on it.
I think I remember maybe SES was doing some work about, like, because they were discussing the like end problem for a little bit, fixing the accounting there. Maybe Water or SES have like the beginnings of a policy somewhere.
No, I think it was Paper Imperium that brought it up, and then SES said that, you know, they could give out a grant for someone to work on it.
Yeah, it's kind of an incentive problem, I guess, to a certain extent. Like people who lose DAI are obviously incentivized to try to get it back, but less so for anyone coming up with a reasonable overall framework.
Are you saying that this 10 million lock DAI is an opportunity to incentivize somebody to make the policy for us?
Perhaps, I don't know.
Yeah, it would have been if we hadn't said we'd already do it. Yeah.
For me, the complex thing is like where you to draw the line. When DAI is burned, that's pretty nice because it's easy from a technical point of view to say, okay, we're not worried about it, you know, appearing somewhere else. And then there's DAI in the DAI contract. That's another case. But then what about people who lose their DAI by sending it to some other wrong address or locking it up in some bugged contract? So yeah, it just needs to be a very like hard policy for like what cases can we deal with and which ones can't we deal with, because if we need to do some due diligence on weird third-party contracts to determine whether or not DAI is perpetually locked, will be a massive workload.
It sounds like we need protocol engineering to kind of issue a technical statement about it first, about what could be and what should not be. I think. I mean, we can make stuff up, but I'm gonna go to the engineers on this.
Well, I do want to be mindful of the time here. I really appreciate everyone's perspective. Let's keep these discussions going in the forum, and possibly again next week when we see you all here. So thank you, everyone. That does it for this meeting, and yeah, appreciate you joining us.